"Sign this now," Lucas commanded, his voice a lethal rumble echoing off the mahogany walls. Bryony stared at the parchment. She was just a maid, a fat, invisible girl scrubbing floors. Now, the deadliest man in Chicago was shoving a marriage certificate into her trembling hands. Footsteps echoed like a judge's gavel down the sprawling, marble-tiled corridors of the Romano estate in Highland Park. Bryony Sullivan kept her head down, her chubby fingers gripping the wooden handle of her feather duster until her knuckles turned a mottled white. She was out of breath, a thin sheen of sweat sticking the collar of her black and white uniform to her thick neck. Bryony was fat. She did not hide behind polite euphemisms like curvy or big-boned, though others sometimes did when they were trying to be kind. Carrying 260 pounds on a modest 5'4" frame meant that she took up space in a world that preferred women who were small, delicate, and easily swept aside. Her thighs chafed relentlessly beneath the cheap polyester of her skirt, and her round, soft face was perpetually flushed from the physical exertion of maintaining a 30-room mansion. Yet, ironically, her size made her entirely invisible to the dangerous, beautiful people who inhabited this house. To the men in custom Italian suits with concealed firearms, and to the impossibly sleek women draped in diamonds who draped themselves over those men, Bryony was merely a piece of the furniture, a fixture designed to scrub away the sins of the night before. She slipped into the main study, a cavernous room filled with first-edition books, heavy velvet drapes, and the lingering scent of expensive cigar smoke. She was supposed to polish the antique oak desk before Lucas Romano returned from his morning meeting. Bryony hurried, her heavy breathing filling the quiet room. She swiped the microfiber cloth over the gleaming wood, terrified of leaving even a single smudge. Lucas Romano was a man constructed of sharp angles and cold, unyielding violence. At 32, he was the acting head of the Romano Syndicate, a legitimate businessman on paper and a ruthless predator in reality. He was terrifyingly handsome, with pitch-black hair, an aristocratic jawline, and eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic Ocean. Bryony had only spoken to him twice in her 3 years of employment, and both times consisted of her stammering apologies while staring at the polished toes of his bespoke Oxford shoes. Suddenly, the heavy double doors flew open, crashing against the stops. Bryony gasped, instantly dropping to her knees behind the massive leather sofa, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "I don't give a damn what the board says, Ronald." Lucas's voice was a low, terrifying growl. He stormed into the room, tearing off his silk tie and throwing it onto a side table. Ronald Gray, Lucas's sharp-featured, ruthlessly pragmatic lawyer, followed close behind. "Lucas, you must listen to reason. Your grandfather's will is ironclad. It was filed privately with Judge Thomas Halstead. If you are not legally married by your 33rd birthday, which is exactly 3 days from now, the controlling shares of the downtown casino developments, the ports, and the legitimate shell corporations all revert to a trust controlled by the Commission. Worse, the Navarro family will use the transitional weakness to launch a hostile takeover." "It's a forced hand," Lucas roared, slamming his fist onto the very desk Bryony had just polished. The sound made her flinch, pulling her knees tight to her chest. She prayed her breathing wouldn't give her away. She was trapped. "It is a tradition," Ronald corrected calmly. "He wanted you settled. He wanted the bloodline secured. Marry Sofia Esposito. Her father has been hinting at an alliance for months." "Sofia is a snake," Lucas spat, pacing the floor like a caged panther. "Her brother is sleeping with Vincent Navarro's underboss. If I bring Sophia into this house, I might as well put a gun in her hand and point it at my own head while I sleep. Every woman in our circle is compromised. They are spies, Ronald. They want the crown, they want the money, and they want me dead. Then find someone outside the circle, Ronald suggested, pinching the bridge of his nose. A civilian. Pay her off. $1 million for a year of her life. An ironclad prenuptial agreement, and an annulment when the trust secures your assets. Lucas scoffed bitterly. A civilian? A regular woman who will run screaming to the FBI the first time someone fires a bullet at my car? Or worse, some gold digger who will fall in love with the lifestyle and try to blackmail me? I need someone who knows her place. Someone pliant. Someone completely dependent, with zero connections, no ambition to be a mob queen, and who is completely beneath the notice of my enemies. Behind the sofa, Bryony's foot cramped. She tried to shift her weight, but her knee popped loudly in the silent room. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Who is there?" Lucas's voice dropped an octave, turning deadly soft. Bryony squeezed her eyes shut, tears springing to her lashes. She slowly raised herself, her plump, trembling hands gripping the back of the leather sofa for support. She stood up, feeling impossibly large and entirely vulnerable under the sudden, piercing gaze of the two men. I'm sorry," Bryony stammered, her cheeks burning crimson. "I was just dusting, Mr. Romano. I tried to leave, but you came in so fast, and I didn't want to interrupt." Ronald's hand slipped into his jacket, resting on the concealed weapon at his side. Lucas held up a hand, stopping his lawyer. Lucas slowly walked around the desk, his storm-grey eyes sweeping over Bryony. He took in her flushed, round face, the panicked flutter of her double chin, her terrified brown eyes, and the bulky, ill-fitting maid's uniform that clung tightly to her heavy hips and thick waist. He looked at her, not with the usual disgust or mockery she received from men, but with a cold, calculating intensity that made her stomach drop. "What is your name?" Lucas asked, stepping closer. He was so close she could smell his cologne, a rich blend of tobacco and vanilla. "Bryony. Bryony Sullivan, sir." "How long have you worked in my house, Bryony?" 3 years. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, I swear I didn't hear anything. I don't know anything about a will, or the Navarros, or Judge Halstead. I'm just a maid. I'm nobody." Lucas's eyes narrowed slightly, a terrifying smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Ronald, then back to the overweight, trembling woman in front of him. She had no money. She had no power. She was physically unassuming to a world that only valued supermodels and assassins. No rival family would ever believe she held any real influence over him. She was the perfect ghost. "You're right, Bryony," Lucas said softly, his gaze locking onto hers. "You are nobody, which makes you exactly what I need. Mr. Romano, I don't understand," Bryony whispered, clutching her feather duster to her chest like a pathetic shield. Lucas turned his back to her, walking to a hidden safe behind a framed oil painting of a Venetian landscape. He punched in a code, the heavy steel door clicking open. "Ronald, draw up the contract. Standard non-disclosure, blanket asset waiver, and a binding matrimony clause. I want it printed and on my desk in 10 minutes. Ronald Gray looked utterly bewildered. "Lucas, you cannot be serious. A maid? A civilian employee? The families will think it's a joke." "Let them laugh," Lucas said coldly, pulling a thick stack of documents from the safe. "While they are busy laughing, I will secure the empire. They expect me to make a strategic chess move, to marry an Esposito or a Lombardi. When I marry the help, they will be utterly confused. They won't know how to play her, because she isn't on the board. He turned back to Bryony. Sit down, Bryony. She didn't move. Her legs felt like lead. Please, sir, just fire me. Let me go home. I won't say a word. I promise. I said, Sit down, Lucas commanded, the air in the room dropping 10 degrees. Bryony scrambled to the heavy oak chair opposite his desk, her wide hips barely fitting between the armrests. She sat on the very edge, her knees pressed tightly together, her breathing ragged. 10 agonizing minutes passed in absolute silence. Lucas poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, drinking it slowly while he watched her. He analyzed every inch of her. She was terrified, soft, and remarkably unpolished. Her hands were red and calloused from cleaning chemicals. She was the antithesis of everything in his world. Ronald returned, holding a freshly printed stack of legal paper. He set it on the desk in front of Bryony, along with a heavy, gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. Read it, Lucas ordered. Bryony looked down at the blinding white pages. The legal jargon swam before her eyes. Matrimony. Irrevocable. Asset forfeiture. What is this? She choked out. A marriage document, Lucas stated plainly, leaning over the desk so his face was inches from hers. In 3 days, we will stand before a private magistrate, and you will become my wife. You will move out of the servants' quarters and into the master wing. You will attend public galas by my side when required, and you will smile. In exchange, you will be compensated generously. I don't want to be your wife, Bryony blurted out, the panic overriding her fear for a brief, suicidal second. I'm a maid, and look at me. She gestured frantically to her large body. I'm fat, Mr. Romano. I'm ugly. I don't fit in your world. Your friends will humiliate me. Your enemies will use me. I can't do this. Lucas's expression didn't soften, but something dark and curious flickered in his eyes. He reached out, his large, scarred hand grabbing her chin. He forced her to look up at him. His grip was entirely firm, immovable, yet strangely lacking the brutality she expected. I didn't ask for a runway model, Bryony, he said, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. I don't care about your weight. I care about your loyalty. You think you're useless because society told you that soft women have no value. But in my world, beauty is a weapon used to slit a man's throat while he sleeps. I am surrounded by beautiful, lethal vipers. I look at you, and I see safety. I see a woman who will be so grateful for my protection that she will never betray me. Tears spilled over her plump cheeks, splashing onto his hand, but he didn't pull away. I know about your mother, Bryony, Lucas continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I do background checks on every servant in this house. I know she has stage 4 renal failure. I know you work 80 hours a week trying to pay for her dialysis at St. Jude's because her insurance lapsed. I also know your younger brother, Kevin, owes $30,000 to a bookie running out of the South Side, a bookie who works for my rivals. Bryony froze, the breath leaving her lungs in a sharp gasp. How could you? I know everything, Lucas said, finally releasing her chin. He picked up the heavy gold pen and pressed it into her trembling, sweaty palm. His fingers curled over hers, wrapping her hand around the barrel. If you sign this paper, Lucas said, his tone absolute, your mother will be transferred to the finest private clinic in Geneva by tomorrow morning. Her medical bills will disappear. Your brother's debt will be erased with a single phone call, and the men looking to break his legs will never look in his direction again. You will have a bank account with $3 million in your name." He leaned closer, the scent of tobacco and vanilla wrapping around her like a heavy velvet noose. "But if you refuse," his voice turned to ice, "you walk out of that door. Kevin's bookie gets a phone call telling him exactly where your brother sleeps. Your mother's clinic receives an anonymous tip about fraudulent billing, and she gets kicked to the curb. And you? You go back to scrubbing floors for minimum wage until you inevitably watch them both die." Bryony stared at the paper. It wasn't a proposal. It was a hostage negotiation, and he held all the collateral. She thought of her mother, pale and fragile in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room. She thought of her brother, stupid and desperate, who would surely end up in a ditch by the end of the week. She looked at Lucas. The ruthless boss of the Chicago underworld was staring at her, waiting. He had calculated every angle, weaponized her poverty, and boxed her into a corner where her only escape was through him. "Sign this now," Lucas commanded, his voice leaving absolutely no room for defiance. Bryony's hand shook so violently she could barely grip the pen. She pressed the gold nib to the paper. The ink bled slightly onto the crisp white page. With a sob trapped in her throat, she dragged the pen across the dotted line, signing away her freedom, her anonymity, and her life to the devil himself. "Good girl," Lucas murmured, snatching the paper from the desk. He handed it to Ronald. "File it immediately." Bryony buried her face in her hands, her thick shoulders shaking as she wept. She was no longer just the fat, invisible maid. She was now the wife of a monster, thrust into a war she didn't understand, wearing a target on her back that she could never wash off. 3 weeks had passed since the ink dried on the marriage certificate, and Bryony's life had fractured into an unrecognizable reality. She had been relocated from her cramped, windowless room in the basement to the sprawling master suite. Her cheap polyester uniforms were burned, replaced by rows of custom-tailored silk dresses and cashmere sweaters. Lucas had flown in a seamstress from Milan, who specialized in plus-size couture, ensuring every garment draped perfectly over Bryony's heavy curves, thick thighs, and wide hips. For the first time in her life, her fatness was not treated as a problem to be solved, but a canvas to be dressed in thousands of dollars of fabric. Yet beneath the silk, she remained a terrified prisoner. Lucas was a phantom husband. He spent his days orchestrating his criminal empire, and his nights locked in his study, leaving Bryony to wander the mansion like a beautifully dressed ghost. True to his word, her mother was safe in Geneva, and her brother's debts had vanished into thin air. She had $3 million in a private account, but she had never felt so utterly powerless. Her true test arrived on a bitterly cold Friday night, the annual Winter Solstice Gala hosted at the Grand Windsor Hotel. It was neutral ground where the city's rival syndicates gathered under the guise of philanthropy. "Stand up straight," Lucas ordered, his voice cutting through the silence of the armored limousine as it glided toward the venue. He looked devastatingly lethal in a bespoke black tuxedo, a silver Rolex glinting on his wrist. Bryony shifted uncomfortably in her deep emerald green velvet gown. The corset was tight, pushing up her full breasts, while the heavy fabric cascaded over her stomach and hips. She nervously wrung her plump hands, terrified of the impending public debut. "They are going to laugh at you, Lucas," she whispered, staring at the floorboards. "When they see me, they will think you've lost your mind." Lucas reached across the leather seat, his large hand enveloping hers. The warmth of his skin sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Let them look," he commanded smoothly. Let them underestimate you. Let them think I married a weak, foolish maid. The moment they drop their guard to mock you is the moment they expose their throats to me. You are my perfect misdirection, Bryony. Do not slouch. The doors opened, and camera flashes exploded like gunfire. Lucas gripped her elbow firmly, guiding her out of the vehicle and up the red carpet. The moment they stepped into the grand ballroom, the music seemed to falter. Hundreds of eyes locked onto them. Bryony felt the suffocating weight of their judgment. She saw the sleek, skeletal women in backless dresses whispering behind manicured hands. She saw the dangerous, hard-eyed men exchanging confused, mocking glances. The ruthless boss of the Romano family had married a fat, plain civilian. The whispers hissed through the room like venom. Smile, Lucas muttered through clenched teeth, nodding politely to a passing capo. Bryony forced a trembling smile, her heart hammering wildly. Halfway through the evening, Lucas was cornered by an aggressive group of union bosses, leaving Bryony temporarily alone near the champagne tower. She tried to make herself as small as possible, hiding behind a marble pillar, when a sickeningly sweet voice sliced through the air. So this is the charity case Lucas picked up from the gutter. Bryony turned to see Sophia Esposito. Sophia was everything Bryony was not. Tall, razor-thin, with sharp cheekbones, flawless olive skin, and a crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was the woman Ronald had insisted Lucas marry. I heard you used to scrub the toilets, Sophia sneered, stepping into Bryony's personal space. Two other mob wives flanked her, giggling maliciously. Tell me, did you find a magic lamp while cleaning the baseboards? Because, looking at you, it's clear Lucas didn't marry you for your charm, and he certainly didn't marry you for your body. You look like a stuffed pig wrapped in expensive drapery. Tears pricked the corners of Bryony's eyes. The old Bryony, the invisible maid, would have dropped her gaze and apologized for existing. But as she looked at Sophia, a sudden, blinding realization hit her. Lucas had saved her family. He had put a ring on her finger, and most importantly, Sophia was furious because Bryony possessed the one thing Sophia's beauty couldn't buy, the Romano throne. Bryony lifted her chin, her double chin prominent but her gaze steady. I might have scrubbed toilets, Sophia, Bryony said, her voice surprisingly calm. But at least my hands are clean. Everyone in this room knows your brother is sleeping with the Navarro cartel. You didn't want a marriage. You wanted a coup. Lucas married me because I don't carry venom in my teeth. Sophia's beautiful face twisted into an ugly, hateful sneer. She raised her hand, fully intending to slap the insolent maid across her round cheek. Before Sophia's hand could connect, a massive grip locked onto her wrist. Lucas materialized from the crowd, his eyes practically glowing with violent rage. He twisted Sophia's wrist just enough to make her gasp in pain. If you ever attempt to strike my wife again, Lucas whispered, his voice carrying the chilling promise of a shallow grave, I will cut off your hand and mail it to your father in a jewelry box. Walk away, Sophia. Sophia snatched her hand back, her face pale with terror, and hurried away with her entourage. Lucas turned to Bryony, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he was going to reprimand her for speaking out of turn. Instead, his gaze dropped to her lips, a dangerous, possessive heat flaring in his stormy eyes. I told you not to slouch, he murmured, his hand sliding to the small of her back. You handled her perfectly. Bryony's breath hitched. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was learning to play the game. The gala dragged on, the air growing thick with expensive perfume and veiled threats. Bryony needed a moment to breathe. She excused herself, navigating the labyrinth of the hotel toward the women's restroom. However, her years of scrubbing the Grand Windsor Hotel as a teenager before she worked for Lucas had mapped the building's service corridors into her brain. Wanting to avoid the wealthy women who would inevitably glare at her in the restroom, she slipped through an unmarked door that led into a dimly lit servants' hallway. It was quiet here. She leaned against the concrete wall, kicking off her agonizing high heels to give her swollen feet a rest. Suddenly, the muffled sound of urgent voices drifted from the cracked door of a service elevator shaft nearby. Bryony froze. Her maid instincts kicked in. Be silent. Be invisible. She crept closer, her bare feet making no sound on the concrete, and peered through the crack. Standing in the shadows was Ronald Gray, Lucas's trusted lawyer. He was speaking frantically to a heavily tattooed man Bryony instantly recognized from Lucas's security briefings. Dante Navarro, the Navarro family's top hitman. "The timeline is moved up," Ronald hissed, nervously checking his watch. "Lucas is distracted by the fat cow. He thinks she's a shield, but she's made him a laughing stock. The commission is already questioning his sanity. We take him out tonight." "Where?" Dante growled, pulling a silenced pistol from his tuxedo jacket. He always uses the private VIP exit through the kitchen to avoid the press at the end of the night. His driver is already dead. My men replaced him. When he steps into the alley, you put 2 in his chest. I'll take control of the shell corporations by Monday morning." Bryony pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Ronald. The man who had drafted her marriage contract. The man who had been Lucas's right hand for a decade. He was the rat. Panic seized her. She had to warn Lucas. She turned, but in her haste, her large hip knocked against a metal cleaning cart left in the hallway. The metal bucket clattered to the ground with a deafening crash. The voices in the elevator shaft stopped instantly. "Someone's out there!" Dante snarled. Bryony didn't think. She ran. She didn't bother grabbing her shoes. She sprinted down the concrete corridor, her heavy velvet dress dragging on the floor, her heart exploding against her ribs. She was not fast, but she was desperate. She burst through the double doors leading into the bustling hotel kitchen, nearly colliding with a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Hey, watch it!" the waiter yelled. Bryony ignored him, shoving past the metal prep tables and terrified staff. She burst out into the main ballroom, her hair disheveled, her bare feet bleeding from stepping on broken glass in the kitchen. The music screeched to a halt. Hundreds of guests stared in absolute shock as the Mafia Boss's wife ran through the opulent room like a wild animal. Lucas was standing near the exit, conversing with 2 capos. He saw her, and his eyes widened in alarm. He immediately dropped his glass and strode toward her. "Bryony, what the hell?" "Ronald!" she screamed, her chest heaving as she practically collapsed into Lucas's solid chest. She gripped his lapels with terrifying strength. "It's Ronald. He's working with Dante Navarro. They killed your driver. They're waiting for you in the kitchen alley." The entire ballroom went dead silent. Ronald, who had just walked back into the room from a side door, froze in his tracks. All eyes turned to the lawyer. Lucas's face hardened into a mask of pure, demonic fury. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't question her. He looked at Ronald, and he knew. The pieces instantly fell into place. "Guards!" Lucas commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. Ronald panicked. He reached into his jacket, pulling a concealed firearm, desperate to shoot his way out. But before he could even aim, Lucas's hand flashed out. The deafening roar of a gunshot shattered the silence of the ballroom. Ronald fell to the marble floor, a neat red hole between his eyes. Lucas stood over him, a smoking silver pistol in his hand, his face devoid of any emotion. Screams erupted from the wealthy guests, but Lucas's men immediately locked the doors, drawing their own weapons to secure the room. Lucas holstered his gun and turned back to Bryony. She was shaking violently, crying, completely overwhelmed by the brutal violence she had just witnessed. She expected him to yell, to drag her out, to be furious that she had caused such a scene. Instead, Lucas dropped to his knees right there on the blood-splattered marble floor. He didn't care about the hundreds of eyes watching them. He reached out, his bloody hands gently lifting her cut, bare feet. "You saved my life," Lucas whispered, looking up at her. The cold, ruthless monster was gone, replaced by a man staring at her with terrifying, absolute devotion. "They ignored you. Ronald ignored you. He thought you were just a fat, stupid maid. And because he underestimated my wife, he is dead." Bryony looked down at the man who commanded empires, kneeling at her feet. She wasn't an invisible maid anymore. She was the one who saw the things everyone else missed. She had weaponized her invisibility, and she had won. Lucas stood, scooping her heavy, voluptuous body into his strong arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. He held her tight against his chest, pressing a fierce, possessive kiss to her forehead. "Let's go home, Mrs. Romano," he said, turning to carry her out of the ballroom, his men forming an impenetrable wall of protection around them. Bryony rested her head against his shoulder, her heart finally slowing. She had signed a marriage document under duress, forced into a world of violence and shadows. But as Lucas carried her through the wreckage of his enemies, Bryony realized the ultimate twist. She was no longer a hostage in the Romano Empire. She was its queen. Wow, what an incredible journey from an invisible maid to a mafia queen. Did you expect that massive betrayal from Ronald? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you loved this intense romance and want more thrilling stories of dark devotion, secret plots, and unexpected heroes, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. See you next time.